Hashem, so many of our programs have been with the most incredible people outside of Cleveland and Eretz Yisrael, all around the United States. But I am privileged to introduce Yocheved Davidowitz, who has become not only a mentor, but a dear friend. Personally, she is living in Cleveland and has really, really impacted, I'm just saying on a personal note, the Cleveland community in such a profound way. In the short time, Yocheved, how long have you been here for? Oh, we can't hear you.
5 years.
Okay, in the short 5 years has really impacted the Cleveland community in such a profound way through her, one, in terms of being a therapist and helping so many women in the community, and through your teaching and personally teaching, for the Chizuk mission now for probably the past, I don't know if it's past 2 years, but I just want to give you a personal shout out and a personal thank you. And we are so excited to hear from you today. And as I always introduce whoever is speaking for us, I would like very much that the learning should be for my mother, Shendel Bas Moshe, and for Ruchama Chaya Fruma Bas Do Pinchas, for Rav Yisrael Noach Ben Yitzchak Matisyahu. And I ask also for Refuah Shalema, for a dear, dear special person, for George Ben Chana, for Yechiel Meir Ben Bala, and for Alana Rivka Bas Rachel, and for Refuahs, and for Yeshua's, and for Geula. And we look so forward, Yocheved, to hearing from you. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. All right, so I see a lot of black squares. I know when you do a Zoom thing, the temptation of just listening is there, but if anybody can, no pressure, put your face on. It's great because then I'm talking to people instead of black squares, and it would just be nice to see all of you. But so no pressure, but if you can join with your face, that's always appreciated. Thank you. Okay, so first of all, I want to thank Barry and thank Aviva for having me. This is very exciting. Barry and I had actually been playing phone tag, I think for like a year, maybe. And then finally, Hashem arranged it so that we could meet. And I came out of the supermarket and Barry had pulled into the spot right next to me. And so Hashem arranged the meeting, which is like the chain of events that led me to speaking to all of you right now. So we're going to be talking about bringing the Geula specifically through the power of Shmiras HaLashon. And I love the way that the title was worded, because talking about the path towards Ahavas Chinam, the path towards Ahavas Yisrael, is such a positive thing. And when we talk about, especially when we talk about Shmiras HaLashon, a lot of times we think in very negative terms, like don't say this, I can't talk, I can't say this. And I really want to end on a really positive note. So we will get there. But talking about just how difficult the whole idea of watching what we say is, I was at a bar mitzvah. My sister actually made a bar mitzvah earlier in this year, and I have a daily Shmiras HaLashon chat that I do. And one of her friends had recently joined it, and she came over to me and she said, I just joined your chat and I love it, and I said, don't tell me, I already know. First of all, you realize how much Lashon Hara you speak, and that's very overwhelming. And she said, yes, exactly. And then the next thing she said was, or the next thing that I said, and let me guess, the second thing is that now you feel like you can't talk to any of your friends. And she's like, that's it. Everything is so complicated now, all the social situations, and I don't know what to do, and I don't want to leave it, but I'm just very overwhelmed. And I said, okay, I'm going to tell you all what I said to her, because these are the two common things that happen when people start to learn or become more careful about the words that they speak, is they run into these barriers that are there on purpose. The Yetzer Hara makes it very easy for us to not work on Shmiras HaLashon because it is so powerful. But before we even get into that, obviously the reason why we're all here is because we're in Galus and we're here. It's the 9 days now. I always feel like when the 9 days are coming, or I should say even starting with the 3 weeks, and I'm going to interrupt myself for 1 second. We're going to stop and do questions. I'm going to talk for a little while and then do questions. I should have said that from the beginning. So you can feel free to put them in the chat if you want, and I'll look at the chat afterwards, or you could unmute yourself and ask questions. But let me go back to being in the 3 weeks, being in the 9 days. So I feel like there's this like cloud that descends on the world when the 3 weeks starts. And I feel it very, very strongly. And I was talking to a friend once and I said, I feel, don't you like feel, it's almost like a physical pressure when the 3 weeks starts. And she's like, nah, I don't really feel it so much. Like I'm envious of you. Why do you feel it so strongly? And so I was thinking about why I feel it so strongly, like this, the 3 weeks comes and it's just this like oppressive weight. And I realized that when I grew up in a non-religious community. I went to day school where I was the only religious kid there. And, you know, we were getting ready for Yom Tov, but none of my friends really were. There wasn't that feeling in the air, you know, Sukkot is coming, you know, Hanukkah's coming, Purim's coming. We're all, you know, me and my siblings were getting our Purim costumes. My friends got theirs back when it was Halloween. And, you know, I heard about trick-or-treating the next day. So we didn't grow up in a frum environment or religious environment. So my parents, because of that, they made it their business to go to the bungalow colony in the summer. So we would be, you know, we would have some religious friends and we'd be sort of like in a frum community. So really, when I was growing up, the only time that I was in a like religiously observant community was in the summer. And in the summer, when the 3 weeks started, if you're in a bungalow colony, like everything changes. The environment changes. All of a sudden the music stops. Everybody starts to be careful about doing trips and things like that. The 9 days come and they padlock the pool. And it's just like this very stark change that you really feel very strongly. So I think it's because of that I feel it so much more strongly than maybe I feel even sometimes other Yom Tovim that come up. And I always kind of like, it's a dread because it's a sad, depressing time of year, I guess. I don't like to use the word depressing so much, but there it is. And I was just recently talking to my son. I have a 19-year-old son. And he said to me, Mom, I made it to the other side. I said, what do you mean? He said, I think this year I'm actually looking forward to Yom Kippur. And he's 19. So from the time he was 13 till now, like every year I heard before coming up to Yom Kippur, he was so anxious about it, he was so nervous about it, he was dreading it so much. But you do, as you grow up and you go through different, you know, you go through Yom Kippur, you realize what a gift it is. And if you've not had that experience, I give you bracha to have that just transcendent feeling on Yom Kippur where you're just spending the whole day davening and you really feel like an incredible connection with Hashem. But it made me start thinking, because this was like last week that we had this conversation. I understand how you can go from dreading Yom Kippur as a kid, it's fasting, it's hard, you're in shul all day, to really appreciating and looking forward to it. But what about this time of year? What about the 3 weeks, Tisha B'Av? Is there such a thing as like kind of looking forward to Tisha B'Av? Does that even make sense? And I was thinking about it, and here's what I come up with. So, you know, I'd love to know your thoughts. Let me know what you think about this. But you know, unfortunately, we're in Gullus, which means there's a lot of sad and tragic things that happen. And if you have teenagers or have had teenagers, you know that at a certain point, a teenager will say, like around 16, they'll say, is it my imagination or is the world just going crazy? Are there so many horrible things that have been happening recently? And really, what you say to the teenager usually is, no, you're really just getting older. You're really just realizing when you were little, you weren't aware of all the different things that were happening in the world. And now you're just aware of it. And it's unfortunately true that we're in Gullus, that these things happen and it's very hard to process. And even though I say that now, I feel like the last 3 years have been really, really crazy. But, you know, you witness all these tragedies and you hear about things that happen. Unfortunately, maybe they're more close to home sometimes, or sometimes, I mean, it happens in Klal Yisrael, it's close to home, right? And you know, I know that I certainly feel this way, but sometimes you hear about a tragedy and you want to be able to engage with it, but you also need to be able to function. And so you kind of feel guilty, like I need to, like somebody's life is falling apart. Somebody just went through this tragedy, but I have to take my kids to school. Like, can you sit and cry on the floor for every time you hear something bad? And it made me think, you know, the 3 weeks and the 9 days, Hashem gave us this incredible gift. Anybody who's unfortunately ever had the experience of sitting Shiva knows what an incredible gift it is to have a structure for grief, to have a prescribed time and a place and permission to just really be sad without having any other repercussions attached to that sadness. And we have this opportunity now in the 3 weeks and the 9 days where all the stories that you heard, and it's not that we don't feel empathy and we don't feel bad when we hear about tragedies or things that happen, but it's a structure and it's a day where you could sit on the floor and really just pour your heart out for every horrible thing that happens. But it's a structure, it's a time, it's prescribed. It goes from the 3 weeks to the 9 days to Tisha B'Av, but then we also go right back to Shabbos Nachamu. Immediately what happens after that grief is that Hashem says, okay, now the grief is over and now you have to move on and you have to function in the world. And not only that, but Shabbos Nachamu, it's music, it's fun. There's value to just feeling somebody else's pain, and that's just it. You just sit and you cry and you feel empathy because you love somebody and their pain is our pain. But the truth is that's really step one. Step two is thinking, now what do we do about that pain? How do we ease the pain? How do we stop the pain? How do we move from that pain to where, we're in a situation of joy? And so you first need to obviously really feel that pain to really be motivated to do something about it. And then you need to know what to do about it, which is where the whole topic of Shmiras HaLashon comes in. Because we know that we're sitting on the floor and we're crying on Tisha B'Av because of the sin of sinas chinam, which is baseless hatred. And Lashon Hara is like really intertwined in that, right? Because you don't like somebody, so then you say Lashon Hara about them. And you say Lashon Hara, or you hear Lashon Hara about people, and that leads you towards sinas chinam. And it's like this vicious cycle, and they're both connected and they're so intertwined. In fact, the first Tisha B'Av all started with Lashon Hara, right? The sin of the Meraglim started with Lashon Hara, and we're here to this day on Tisha B'Av because of that Lashon Hara. So how do we break the cycle? How do we stop that Lashon Hara, sinas chinam, Lashon Hara, sinas chinam cycle? I want to talk a little bit about Shmiras HaLashon, but I also want to talk about some of the symptoms of Lashon Hara. And I also want to, like I said, I want to end off on a positive note. And I also really want to give everybody here some very practical tools that you could take from this meeting and really work in your life. Okay, so let's talk about Shmiras HaLashon. The first thing that I told my friend when she came over to me, it was actually my sister's friend, but family friend, she said, I feel like it's just too overwhelming. I started learning Shmiras HaLashon and it's just too much. The halachos are too much. And the truth is that the Chafetz Chaim tells us this in Sefer Shmiras HaLashon. He says that the trick of the Yetzer Hara is that he makes you feel like it's an impossible task to work on Shmiras HaLashon. It's just too much. There's too much halachos. There's too much to learn. We speak all day, and especially nowadays, right? We don't just speak all day. We text all day. We're constantly communicating with other people. We're literally engaged in speech almost all the time when we're up and when we're awake. So the Chafetz Chaim says that the Yetzer Hara makes it so that we kind of say, you know what, this is too overwhelming. And instead of working on this, I'm going to work on something else. And it's too hard. And the reason why obviously that temptation is there is because the contrasting power, the power of working on our speech, of holding ourselves back from Lashon Hara, of saying positive things, that power is so strong. So the Yetzer Hara tries to divert us from studying that. And everybody, in their own way needs to figure out a way to learn Sefer Shmiras HaLashon, learn Sefer Chafetz Chaim in whatever way. Recently, somebody called me up from Israel. She said that somebody in their neighborhood was sick and the community decided that they wanted to take on learning Sefer Shmiras HaLashon. So she wanted to know what I thought, because what they were going to do was they were going to do one of those sign-up sheets where everybody picks an hour a day. And during that hour, they were going to work on not speaking Lashon Hara during that hour. So she said she was nervous. She said, well, what if we do that and somebody doesn't keep the hour? And then what do we do? And I said, you know what? It's a little bit like going on a diet, right? There's a lot of discussion. I do a little bit of this in my practice. Like I work with people on emotional eating, and there's a lot of, if you're in the nutrition world, there's all different kind of ways that people eat. You could be vegan, you could be keto, you could do all these different things. And the truth is the best diet really is the one that you keep, is the one that you could live with. It's the one that you can incorporate into your lifestyle. So it's the same thing with Shmiras HaLashon. So I'm like, don't make it so rigid. Decide that you want to work on Lashon Hara, on Shmiras HaLashon rather. And then let everybody decide what they want to do. So maybe somebody wants to join a chat and listen for 2 to 3 minutes a day of a lesson. Or maybe somebody wants to read one of I probably have it even here on my desk somewhere, the lesson a day book. Or maybe somebody wants to take an hour a day to, put a reminder on their phone. And I want to get back to this because this is probably one of the most powerful things that we can do, is to pick an individual person and don't say Lashon Hara about that person, because we all have that person in our lives that we tend to say Lashon Hara about more. Maybe it's a family member, maybe it's a coworker, maybe it's a neighbor, somebody that's probably in your life all the time, and pick that person, really work on not saying Lashon Hara about that one specific person. So that was the advice I gave her. And it really ties into what I said before, what I really want to talk about, which is the symptoms, the source of Lashon Hara, because in a certain way, Lashon Hara is really a symptom. It's a little bit like if you get a headache, let's say, right? So if you take an Advil for the headache seemingly goes away. You feel better. You don't have pain anymore. But really the headache is there. It's just being masked. And when the Advil wears off, the headache will either come back, or when whatever triggered the headache in the first place happens again, you'll get the headache again, right? I know I used to get terrible migraines, and I would take medication. I even had prescription medication at one point. And then I made the connection that I was getting headaches. I wasn't getting headaches rather when I wasn't drinking any diet soda. Sadly, I used to be addicted to Diet Coke and I loved it. But when I stopped drinking diet soda and cut out all artificial sugars, I stopped getting headaches. So when you figure out what the symptoms are, then you manage, you don't get the headache. And it's the same thing with Lashon Hara. Lashon Hara, to a certain extent, is a symptom of being critical and looking at people with an ayin ra, looking at people with a negative eye. And if you would develop the opposite, let's say an ayin tov, learn how to judge people favorably, you wouldn't get to that point of speaking Lashon Hara. Now, sometimes you need to manage the symptoms, right? So sometimes you get a headache, you have to take an Advil, that's fine. And if a person is just working on what they say and practicing how to talk, that's wonderful. But if the question that I want to ask you, and that I would always ask myself, is how do you feel, right? How do you feel about your fellow man? How do you feel about the person that's irritating you? How do you feel about a different community of Jews, let's say? Is that feeling negative or is that feeling positive? And I feel like a little bit as a therapist, sometimes I say my job in life is to try to get people to realize, to feel what they know. So people will say to me, like in therapy, like, I know that Hashem exists, but I don't feel like he's taking care of me, right? So how do you know something? How do you get to feel that way? And the answer is not that exciting. The question's more exciting than the answer in a way, which it always is. But the answer is really hard work, and to focus on working slowly towards the goal that you have. So let's say with regards to being critical, I said this is really the source of Lashon Hara, looking at somebody with a negative eye and seeing something and being easily irritated. And by the way, guys, this is really in nature. There are people who by nature are more negative and people who by nature are more critical, and some people who by nature, we know these people, like Barry. If you've ever spoken to Barry, she's full of sunshine and everybody is amazing and she loves people, and everything she has to say about this person was so beautiful and that person was so amazing. And I'm sure Barry's worked very hard to get that way. But even if you were born with a more critical and negative nature, that doesn't, first of all, there's positives to that also. There's positives to everything. There's an upside to being critical. There's an upside to being negative. There really is. People always challenge me when I say that, and they say, what do you mean? If you're a critical person, you're very detail oriented, you notice the mistakes, you're able to plan for worst case scenario things. There's a lot of benefits that come along with that personality type. But there's also a downside that needs to be managed, as with every with every personality type that comes along with that. But so what you do is that you catch yourself and you reframe your thoughts. And in the beginning, it feels a little unnatural and it's really hard. And then as you work on it more and more and more, it becomes more your sort of natural go-to of how you deal with other people. And kind of like what I was saying with Shmiras HaLashon, picking one person, Rabbeinu Yonah says that the way that you work on Ahavas Yisrael is by picking a specific person and working on how you feel about that person. Because a lot of times when we talk about, let's say Shmiras HaLashon, it's a broad topic. Ahavas Chinam, broad topic, Sinas Chinam, right? We talk about loving Klal Yisrael, baseless hatred, and we're thinking big, we're thinking large, we're thinking in terms of big groups, right? One group of Jews, one denomination, another denomination, and there's animosity between them, and how do we change that animosity? But the truth is that a lot of times that can almost be a little bit of a deflection, and it can take us away from really what's actually going to change the world, which is picking the person that really annoys you and working on giving that person the benefit of the doubt. I used to teach, I live in Cleveland now, but I lived in Vancouver, British Columbia for 11 years. And for 6 years, I think it was 6, maybe longer, I taught in a non-religious day school, which was an amazing experience. And I am still very good friends with a lot of the teachers that were there, but I was the only religious teacher there. And so all other teachers, mostly Jewish staff, but not religious at all. And the school was also like, again, I was the only religious teacher there. So I was sitting in the staff room like a day or two after I first started working there. And I was sitting next to another teacher, and I turned to her and I said, so what do you teach? And she says, Tikkun Olam. And I was like, what? What is that? And she was horrified that I, as a religious person, didn't know what the subject of Tikkun Olam means, which, if you know, and you maybe, are familiar with this curriculum, Tikkun Olam means to repair the world. And it's actually a beautiful curriculum. And I actually taught it one year where, I think it was 6th and 7th grade, they did all these like initiatives and projects, and we did, coat drives and, got the kids involved in different like chesed opportunities in the community. And it's really wonderful. But we had a discipline issue one year, and I was sitting next to a dear friend of mine, one of the teachers there, and she said, I don't understand. What do they learn in Tikkun Olam? How could the kids behave this way? And I remember thinking, and I should have said something, but like I didn't have the guts to say it. Tikkun Olam doesn't have anything to do with personal behavior. It's very nice to teach the kids to take communal responsibility, but a lot of times the underlying message that's being sent is that if you take communal responsibility, you don't have to take personal responsibility. And really what it's about, not so much about going to a soup kitchen, but being nice to your annoying sister. That is much more powerful, and that has a much bigger impact, first of all, personally, secondly, on the family, ultimately on the classroom, the school, the community, and the world, rather than going outside in. We want to go inside out. And so again, thinking about what I can do right now to the person, how I speak or how I treat or how I think about the person who irritates me the most is the thing that's really going to, take us on that path to Ahavas Chinam. And it's a Yetzer Hara, by the way. It's very hard. We're always tempted to think big or to think large. But in this case, I really encourage everybody as much as possible to think individually and to think about, again, the one person. I want to go back to the story of the person that I met at the bar mitzvah. And so she said to me two things. One, she said it's too overwhelming to work on her speech. The second thing she said is that it made her social situations harder, which is what happens sometimes when people start to learn about Shmiras HaLashon, they start to learn about Lashon Hara. So they find that their social group, like they go out with friends and people are speaking Lashon Hara, now they're uncomfortable, and it makes interactions harder. And what do they do? And the truth is that when we work on Shmiras HaLashon and when we grow in this area, our lives become better in this world, not just in the next world. Hashem is giving us a prescription of how to operate right here